For the last 20 years, I've been on the relentless pursuit of getting leaner, getting stronger, and becoming superhuman. I've tried every strategy, read every book, and I've left no stone unturned. But there is one huge thing I overlooked, and when I started doing, it changed everything for me. Today, I'm gonna share it with you. Let me know if this sounds familiar. I'm a pretty healthy person. I watch what I eat, I exercise almost every day. I avoid stress, and generally, I work hard to take care of myself. But overall, I still don't feel great. Sure, I probably abuse stimulants a little bit too much, but that's mainly because no matter how much I sleep, I always wake up feeling a little groggy and not that rested. I've generally always been a pretty healthy person. I've battled a few things in my life, but small things like allergies and even growing up asthmatic. But for the most part, I take care of myself. So I'm a little stumped as to why I'm so tired and I just feel stuck. But I want to figure this out. And there is one thing that I've been overlooking this entire time. Well, actually, I was doing it the entire time, but not well. And this was aging me faster. It was impacting my weight training progress and my sleep. So I bring this up to my doctor and I'm looking for answers. Since it seems to be sleep related, maybe it's sleep apnea. So I go and get some testing. I did the overnight sleep study test and I remember having a newborn 1-year-old at the time and getting to spend the night away and thinking I was gonna get a good night's sleep, and it was awful. But the results for that were inconclusive. Maybe I had borderline sleep apnea and I tried a CPAP mask, but it just wasn't comfortable. I wasn't getting any benefit. So this really wasn't the issue. But I'm determined to find an answer. I don't wanna settle for no answer. So I get a referral to go to an ENT, a nose specialist to check some things out. So I find out that I actually have a deviated septum and some of the turbinates in my nose, the bones that filter, moisture, that type of thing, are quite enlarged. So I'm gonna need surgery. So I go under the knife and get this surgery done in 2020, fix my deviated septum, clear some things out to make my breathing quite a bit easier. And this helped quite a bit, but it really wasn't the game changer I thought it would be. I was still, after 6 months, waking up in the morning and not feeling all that rested, which leads me to present day, looking for answers. Let me give you a brief timeline about how I figured this out. So I'm still dealing with some pretty serious allergies. I'm waking up not feeling super present, and no matter how much caffeine or stimulants I take, things aren't getting better. I'm waking up with a dry mouth. I'm still doing some snoring, and almost luckily I start to come across some content and some books on the concept of breathing and breathing mechanics. And although everyone breathes, apparently not everyone breathes correctly. And this can lead to some pretty dysfunctional breathing patterns. Now, most people that have issues with this, they aren't under breathing, which is probably what you think about when it comes to conventional advice, remembering to breathe. And that's not the issue here. In many cases, when someone's suffering from dysfunctional breathing, it comes down to over breathing or breathing too much. Really? That's a thing? Yes, it is. Some people are breathing too much. They're breathing from the wrong places and they're breathing using the wrong mechanics. I'm starting to think that this could be my problem, so I started to dig into the research. When you think of breathing, you probably think of it being necessary to get oxygen. You probably think of slow and controlled things where breath is important, like relaxation and yoga, those sort of things. But breathing, it is so much more than that. Breathing actually controls the acid-base balance in our body. And when it starts to become dysfunctional, it can almost immediately alter your health. From changes in mood and cognition and overall emotion to things like stress and performance and health. And most conventional advice, like stop and take a deep breath, is actually terrible advice when it comes to dysfunctional breathing. And it can actually make things worse. So let's talk about breathing for a second. Breathing has two parts. There's the mechanics of breathing, which is how air moves in and out of our lungs and our bodies, using muscles and speed and the volume of our breaths, but also the chemistry, because you're moving oxygen out of your lungs and into the bloodstream and carbon dioxide out of your body. When you breathe in oxygen, which is sent to the lungs and into the bloodstream. The more you breathe, the faster your heart beats and the more energy you use, sending more overall oxygen to the body. When you breathe out, you're sending carbon dioxide out and your heart rate slows down. And this impacts your autonomic nervous system and your ability to handle stress and rest and recover. When you breathe in, you're preparing for an oxygen demand and essentially firing up your sympathetic nervous system. Breathing out prepares for rest and recovery by activating your parasympathetic nervous system. And everything here is linked, and this is where dysfunctional breathing starts to become problematic. What some people can start to develop for whatever reason, be it lifestyle-based like allergies or even behavioral from anxiety or something like that, is going to be over breathing, meaning they are taking too frequent of breaths. breaths. Because if you take too many breaths, be it they're too fast or they're too big, you start to remove too much carbon dioxide out of your blood, and your blood starts to become too alkaline. And a lot of times this breathing is coming in and out of your mouth, which is really not what your mouth was designed for. And from the mouth, it's really only coming into the upper chest at a really fast pace. When this happens, it leads to over breathing. And when you're over breathing, you start to decrease the blood concentration of CO2, which is called hypocapnia, which is a reduced state of carbon dioxide in the blood. And that's where a lot of these negative side effects start to occur. So I start learning about this stuff and I start connecting some of the dots, and it sounds a lot like my situation. And I start coming across books like The Oxygen Advantage by Patrick McEwen. And I start to discover how I feel maybe due to my breathing. And I start to do some breathing exercises and I tape my mouth while I'm sleeping. And it's helping a bit, but I'm really not sure if it's still the true problem or the underlying cause of all this stuff. But at the same time, no one else is really giving me any answers, and I've already cut into my face, so I'm gonna try this stuff out. If you find yourself in this situation, there are a few quick and easy tests that you can do to give you an idea if you're over breathing or at least sensitive to CO2. Remember, the goal here is, as strange as it sounds, to breathe less, because too much breathing and at a higher breath volume can lead to trouble keeping focus as well as breathlessness during exercise. One way to assess if you're doing this is through a simple test called the BOLT score, or body oxygen level test. This measures how long you can hold your breath to measure relative volume of your breath during rest, which may give you an idea of what would happen during exercise. It's a simple test you can do wherever, and here's what you do. Take a normal breath in through your nose and let out a normal breath out of your nose. You also want to do this after resting for a little while. Then hold your nose with your fingers to prevent any air from going into your lungs. Then start a timer and time the number of seconds until your first desire to breathe, or the first stress of your body urging you with that desire to take a breath in. This isn't to measure how long you can hold your breath, but just until that first sensation that you actually want air. Scores of around 20 seconds are really good. Scores between 10 to 20 seconds may show you that your breathing is compromised. This time in seconds is showing your sensitivity to carbon dioxide, and the longer you can go without that sensation is typically better, which is interesting because it's not the lack of oxygen that makes us want to breathe, it's how much carbon dioxide we can tolerate. But keep in mind, this isn't a perfect test and not a true indication of breathing dysfunction, which I'm gonna get to in a second, but it can give you some clues. And with this information, you can start to work on some breathing exercises and tolerance to carbon dioxide. I started doing them and they're helping a bit, but just like everyone else, I'm human and I'm not doing enough of it. And there's also a lot of crazies out there peddling this stuff. And they could be right sometimes, but also wrong other times. And I wanna make sure that I'm actually focusing on the right things, which is why I wanted to ask some of the best experts in this area and learn the science and present it to you guys. So I took a visit to my colleague, Dr. Scotty Butcher, who's a physiotherapy professor, but he's also an expert in mindfulness and applied biofeedback, as well as clinical physiology. I asked him some questions, plus he ran some diagnostic tests on me to see if I've been over breathing with low levels of CO2 this entire time. And here's what he found. Here I am with my cannula.
The graph is your raw CO2. So this is taking your CO2 levels as you're expiring them. And when the line goes down, that's while you're taking an inspiration, but it doesn't actually measure your inspiration, right? It doesn't measure the breath in. It's just really taking all of your air out, right? So do your best to breathe out through the nose. So usually keep the mouth closed. I mean, you can talk still, it's fine. The value that we look at here is the what we call the end tidal CO2. So it's the one at the very peak at the end there. So that's the end of your expiration. That air, the CO2 that it's being measured at that point in time, is the CO2 that's most close to the alveoli in your lungs, the deep part of your lungs. And that's where, because it's right down in the alveoli, it has a very similar concentration of CO2 as the capillary blood. So as the blood goes through the lungs and it oxygenates, deoxygenates, as well as having CO2 come out again, it's most reflective of the CO2 in your blood. So we use the end tidal CO2 is what it's called, and it's that peak that you see on the graph. Now, normal range for CO2 levels at rest, which is what you are right now, what we should be seeing is anywhere from 35 to 45, with 40 being the absolute mean average normal. Now, with your data, you can see that actually right now, sitting at rest, your CO2 levels are well within what they should be. So you're kind of averaging out here at about 34, 35, or sorry, higher than that, 37, 38, kind of in that range. And obviously each breath is going to be a little bit different depending on, metabolism and what's going on and all that kind of stuff. And just a slightly bigger breath in than normal, and let it out, and then hold it at the bottom. So when just let all your air out, and then just hold it as long as you can. Yeah, keep holding as long as you're able to. Keep going. Breath in and slow out. Okay. So you can see the different breathing techniques and maneuvers will do something slightly different on that. So good news right now is you would screen negative right now, just sitting at rest. But I'm not willing to say that never changes, right? Because obviously, at rest is you're just sitting and chilling. When you're up and moving around, this could be a very different scenario. Right? So that's one of the things that we could do if needed.
So I've been set up with a cannula undergoing some capnotherapy to measure my breathing and the carbon dioxide. Next, I get set up with a bunch of different things, be it a heart rate monitor, a pulse oximeter, also some EMG, skin conductivity, all that stuff to measure a bunch of biofeedback. This is gonna help measure my nervous system response as well as my breathing. And then Dr. Scotty put me under 4 different cognitive tests to measure the stress response, put my body under some stress and see how I reacted to it, as well as all those measures of biofeedback. And although my carbon dioxide levels were okay, which was surprising to me, I was expecting them to be much lower. There were some changes around these parameters when I'm not at rest, when I'm currently undergoing stress, specifically with heart rate variability and my ability to handle stress and recover from stress. And here's what was found there.
So this is the clinician's version of heart rate variability, looking at the max minus minimum. So as your cycle of baroreflex and breathing kind of combine together, you get a high heart rate and then you get a low heart rate, right? And that happens within a baroreflex cycle, basically. And so what we're looking at is the max minus min here. Okay, so as we're looking at this, that's what we're seeing here is the max minus the minimum. Now, this is really interesting because this is actually the opposite effect that we would normally see with someone. So, for example, at baseline, you came in and the difference between max and min was 5 beats. Normally, someone fairly young and healthy would have probably higher than 10 by a lot at baseline. Yours is 5. Now, what that tells me, and again, this is just sort of the clinician's version. There's a more comprehensive version. But in general, if this stays true across the rest of the ways of looking at it, you have a low heart rate variability at rest. Most people would have a higher heart rate variability at rest compared with during these stressors. You actually regulate better when you're stressed. That doesn't mean it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Right? It means that your body is just so used to being on, right? That is your comfort zone, that your physiology responds better when you're engaged.
Yeah.
Okay? So you're a performer, you're a high performer, right? Like you do well in every aspect of what you do, right? This is being reflected in what I'm seeing here, except for the listening stress, because that didn't do anything to you, right?
Yeah.
But if you look at these ones, the color test, the math test, the stressful event, you regulated your nervous system better because you're constantly on, you're used to doing that.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought, I just don't know how to relax?
The thing I've been running from, relaxing. This makes a lot of sense to me, but it wasn't the answer I was expecting. I was expecting this to be all breathing related, but I guess it makes sense, especially given the fact that it's really hard to assess what's going on when I'm at rest compared to when I'm exercising or recovering from exercise or undergoing something stressful. And since the nervous system and breathing are directly linked, it may still be the answer that I'm looking for and some of the direction that I need. Now, if you're feeling like this, you're feeling constantly tired despite what you do, breathing still may be the problem. Check out what Dr. Scotty has to say and some insight around the prevalence of hypocapnia, why taking a big breath in is actually bad advice, and what to do about all of this overbreathing.
We don't know full prevalence about overbreathing and breathing dysfunction. It hasn't been studied at that level, at a high enough level to really understand. There are some stats though to kind of know what goes on. One report was it was out of the States, and it was looking at ambulance calls over a period of time. And what they determined by measuring capnometry and measuring the CO2 levels, they determined that actually 60%, or maybe 60 to 65% of all ambulance calls in one particular area for over whatever period of time had some component that was almost purely due to hypocapnia. And so when they reversed that, and they taught people to get out of that hypocapnia and increase their CO2 levels.
Take a big breath in being bad advice.
Yeah, good. So big breath in being bad advice is mostly because, well, we hear that for, oh, calm down, take a deep breath, right? Often what that does is that actually does the reverse of what we're trying to do. So the deep breath, the component of that that's important is the slow pace, and particularly on the exhalation, because that's one of the things that drives the parasympathetic nervous system to try and bring someone out of a fight or flight state, right? To try and bring them into something that's more rest and digest, and something that's more of a normal relaxation state. When you tell someone to take a deep breath, and you see this on TV all the time. I remember even in the last year trying to count the number of times I've watched a TV show where someone says, just take some deep breaths, right? And then they're, okay, right? These big fast breaths, they almost look like the same breaths you would take if you were exercising heavy. Right? Think of it that way. Exercise is a sympathetic response. It's like you're trying to fight or flight, right? If you take these deep breaths that mimic that, you're putting yourself into a sympathetic state, which is the opposite of what we're trying to do. So it's okay to take a deep breath, but it should be slow, and particularly slow on the exhalation. So rather than the be more of a like that. The strategy would be low and slow. Low and slow breathing. So the idea is low being not only low in terms of where the movement happens, so in the belly, in the lower ribs expanding, but also low in terms of the volume of breath. So you're not doing deep breaths that are fast. You're thinking about trying to minimize the size of your breath to make sure that you're not over breathing. Then the slow is that slow paced, right? So it's trying to get into the pace of breathing that would be down at the 5 to 8-ish breaths a minute mark.
There you have it, folks. Hopefully you learned something new about breathing today. And if you did, I would love to hear about it. So drop it in the comments below. I also wanted to say thank you for Dr. Scotty for running those tests and providing all of this helpful insight. We're going to do another follow-up video on heart rate variability specifically, so stay tuned for that. If it's your first time on my channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you can learn more about nutrition and some helpful nutrition coaching tips. But as great as all those tips are, if you're really serious about starting a nutrition coaching business, the next thing I'll have you do is check out this video I've linked up right here. Today we learned all about breathing, and I wanted to present something that may also be new to you, which is the science of weight loss medication. So check it out right here, and I'll see you in the next video.